Hi, I'm Jennifer Campbell, creator and host of the Systemic Leadership Summit. Welcome to this session. And in this session, we're going to be talking about a number of things, namely governance, purpose, change, and potential in and of organizations. So that's going to be an interesting conversation. And not just the organizational context, but also the bigger context of society and on this planet. My guest for today holds extensive experience in both private and public sector, and he's here to share his experience. And his name is Dr. Louis Klein. Now, Louis is an internationally recognized expert in the field of systemic change and complex project management. In 2010, he was awarded the inaugural Research Prize for the International Center for Complex Project Management. For his work in promoting systems thinking, cybernetics, and action research, he earned a seat on the board of the World Organization for Systems and Cybernetics. He also has held a VP position with the International Society for the Systems Sciences. Currently, Louis serves as the SIG Chair for Organizational Transformation and Social Change with the ISSS. A thought leader, change agent, and author, Louis is a member of the German Association of Political Consultants. In 2015, he was named publisher-editor of Agora 42, a German magazine expanding the leading edges of innovative discourse at the intersection of philosophy, business, and economics. And today he's here to have a conversation with me. A very warm welcome to you, Louis. Thank you so much for being here with us in the Systemic Leadership Summit.
Thank you, Jennifer.
And yeah, let's dive in. And I want to start with one of the articles that you actually shared with me. And I want to quote you on that and see and ask you some questions about that. It's one of your position papers that was posted on the European School of Government's website, and it's called Governing the Serious Games of Society. And in it, you write, and I quote, "We are inescapably thrown into a world of games. Civilization is a matter of governance based on value-driven rules, which organize the many through which a whole emerges. That is more and different from the sum of its parts. We are now living in the Anthropocene," very difficult word for me, "the Anthropocene, a historic situation where humankind is collectively so powerful that the future of the entire planet depends on its capabilities to govern and civilize itself," unquote. Now, my question to you is, how did you develop this worldview? It's a very bold thing to say in an article, or at least it was to me. And why did you embrace this actually very much debated notion of an Anthropocene, still difficult. And it's a term that really ignited a lot of strong debates, for example, between geologists and environmentalists and everybody else who's very concerned about where we find ourselves as mankind. So how did you develop such a view on life?
Well, I'm coming from a systems science tradition, cybernetics in there as well, for the last 30 years. It came as the answer to an older question which I had coming from a winery, where you are exposed to the logic of nature, the eco logic. And you see that with all that we focus on in our education, we are more engaged with a linear and reductionist logic, which is superb to build, well, infrastructure, cars, buildings. The entire engineering works based on that logic, and we created a lot of it. However, as soon as we meet complexity, things we cannot put in a blueprint and deploy or implement, we start to struggle because we do not have a proper training, so to speak, in wrestling with complexity, or as we learned about the VUCA world, volatility, ambiguity, uncertainty, complexity, and all these nasty things which cross our plans and make 2/3 of projects failing.
Mm-hmm.
That's a bit of the background. And building on your question, going in two directions. The Anthropocene, well, very much serves as a placeholder to describe what's different at the beginning of the 21st century to, in contrast to the time before, the last 50 years.
Mm-hmm.
In scientific terms, we speak of the great acceleration, which is that all the indicators and parameters we use to describe what we are, well, as humankind doing on the planet, land use, energy consumption, population, and all of these indicators go exponentially through the roof. And
Mm-hmm.
we don't really have an intuition for that. We can think linear, we can handle what's close to us, but we are not good at all to think or have a feeling for exponential developments. And we are thrown into that at the beginning of the 21st century, very much so. And all we are looking at there is human made. So we built it, we created it. We're doing a lot of stuff to accelerate it, is in business, in logistics, in extractive industries, and all of that. So it's all upon our own ideas how to go on with that, how to manage it, how to lead it, how to regulate it. And this is where the notion of civilization comes in, a process that has been neglected for a while in the discourse. In the 1990s, we had two major works coming up in one was Fukuyama's End of History, and the other was Huntington with the Clash of Civilizations.
Mm-hmm.
Look at the US; they are sort of even. So both had their point in the discourse. But if you look outside the US or outside the Western world, the sales of Huntingtons by far exceeded what Fukuyama was referred to. So the notion of end of history, to think that the magic of self-organization and free market and democracy are the crown of civilization, does not hold for the rest of the world. And there, the perspective on what is it actually that we are doing as a civilization, how do we progress, is very much more present and referred to. And so, soon after that, when we saw that the idea of free markets and democracy being sort of the ultimate goal of everything and the end of history failed, we saw that we had to go back to it. We had Jared Diamond with his Guns, Germs and Steel being one of the first books, winning a Pulitzer Prize for that, to go back to it. We had Niall Ferguson with Civilization. We had Ian Morris with the question why the West rules for now. Really engaging in that there are alternative models. And last but not least, the books of Yuval Harari, the Sapiens and the Homo Deus, they are all fueling a debate on what can we do, and more so, what must we do to meet the challenges of the 21st century?
Yeah.
Be it climate change, be it poverty, be it conflict, there's still a lot to do out there. I would even say much more than ever, although all the other indicators show that in terms of health, of food production, hunger, and so on. We live in the world that was never better than it is at the moment, and at the same time, we have to acknowledge that we are doing that on the account of the planet, exploiting the future. And the question is, how do we get out of this challenge, out of this mess? And my answer to that, and going with the entire community of scholars of the European School of Governance, is to say we need to re-engage with ideas of civilization and find out what is it actually that we use to civilize and govern whatever we do. And we come back to 2 points there. One is organization, is the greatest advancement in civilization ever, coordinating activities towards a desirable outcome. And second, purpose, the narratives, that the grand narrative that is guiding these activities. So we have 2 levels, and probably that already reaches out to what we are speaking about in terms of systemic leadership.
Thank you so much for this introduction. Let me just try and see if I can sum it up before we continue. And that's what you're saying is, when we look at where we find ourselves, there have been these notions of what the ultimate sort of development is in terms of our civilization and how we live on this planet, and that the way we've been doing it from the very linear and engineering approaches that work well in certain areas, but as soon as we get into more complex situations, problems, and exponential growth, the old paradigm is broken. And so that means that we are thrown back into different ways of, or looking for different ways to civilize ourselves, or to create a civilization where, on the one hand, we can um, um, live together at a standard that's better than ever, and at the same time find a way to deal with the really complex sort of negative consequences of what we've created so far and the big problems that we're facing. And so what you're actually saying is that the 2 components of organization and purpose are areas where you look to finding new answers to how do we civilize ourselves and how do we govern ourselves, when we look at the view that you are advertising, you yourself, but also in your organization. So did I get that right?
Indeed, Jennifer. We can take it
Okay.
from there.
All right, good. Because we're going to talk about a number of these things. So purpose and organization. But first, I want to start with governance, because what I find difficult in the systemic realm that you and I both work in is that the notion of governance sort of implies that there's someone who is governing. And what I'm noticing in systems is that usually it's very interesting that we are in the context of systemic leadership, because usually systems shape leadership and systems lead rather than that the individuals lead. The currents within systems is are so strong, and they're much stronger than individuals. So I guess my question to you is, what is governance in your opinion, and do you feel that we will be able to actually get to a place on earth where we can govern ourselves, or to connect it back to what you said about the Anthropocene, is, are we able to govern this power that we now have, this exponential power to influence everything that's on our planet, and that within that context that we're able to civilize ourselves? So I'm really curious, what is governance, and are we able to work with it?
if we want to explore what governance is,
Mm-hmm.
I think the best metaphor or the best image to go to is a game, like a board game, like Monopoly or Settlers of Catan or anything like that. And we were talking about the serious games of society earlier, but the idea is that whatever we do in terms of organization um, regulates based on rules, procedures, structures, a certain realm of activities. And these activities may be arranged in a way that we can refer to them as a game, like Monopoly. Huh? You have a setup of the game. You have players. You have roles. Um, you have rules and regulations, and you have an aim of the game, which is somebody will win after well um, an unfolding agony when one player after the other drops out being bankrupt, and in the end one player will have all the money and all the property. Well, this is
Mm-hmm.
Monopoly, and you can tell from my slightly cynic perspective here that I don't like Monopoly. It's not a good game. It's a bad game. It is not. It is not fair to the players. It is not engaging. The winner takes it all. And in contrast to that, we can look at games like Settlers of Catan, where all the players remain in the game from the very beginning to the very end. And the game that everybody has the rightful hope to win it. And the winner wins by a margin. And then everybody's happy and loves to start all over again. And if we look at our economic system, we may suspect that it is built a little bit more like Monopoly and not so much like Settlers of Catan.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't qualify for Game of the Year, but it is all the outcome of the rules and regulations, the descriptions of the roles, and the unfolding of the game that we put in place. We can change that. And if we change that, we come to other games which may be more desirable and qualify for another joy of playing them, and we'll see another outcome. So that's the idea of governance as what is it that we're referring to in terms of governance. It's not government, and it's certainly not the single ruler who dictates what to do and what not to do. I mean, that would be sort of micromanagement on a large scale if we look at states.
Right.
And this is why tyrants fail after a while. Wait, it's an impossible task. They
Yeah.
may enjoy it for a couple of years, but they're going to fail. We don't see any tyrant, any dictator succeeding on the long run. Well, to quote Keynes, they're all dead anyway. But they're not creating prosperous environments. Their game does not work, and it's the same for organizations. If we do not mind the governance, if we don't mind the processes and structures, the rules and regulations that we put into place, and put all the emphasis on the single leader, organizations will fail
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
their power lies in their structures, in their processes, in what they've learned over the years of their being.
Mm-hmm.
And as I usually say, there's nothing is as smart as a good checklist. And you don't need to be a mastermind. If you only have the wonderful checklist, you can accomplish almost any task in the world.
And so, if I understand you correctly, then, if we want to civilize ourselves and deal with the power that we now hold, and the responsibility that we also carry for impact in the world, then what I hear you say is we can use governance to select the games that we want to play and start playing other games than the ones that are very um, supportive of the old way of doing, where you play a game and there's only one winner and the rest are losers.
Mhm.
But then, is governance then the selecting of the games? Is governance creating different rules? Is governance creating the thing that creates the game? So where exactly do you place governance then? And who will be doing the governing if it's not the single leader sort of approach that we've had for decades?
Mm-hmm. Governance, as we just spoke about it, is really the key to unlock the power of the organization. And we can think of it in terms of game design, which, if we look into organizational theory, brings us back to organizational development. Organizations can change, they can develop, they can continuously improve, they can innovate. The very regulations, the very rules, the very setup they're relying on to support a specific desirable practice of production, of finance, of HR, of logistics, of sales, you name it. That is what governance allows us to think of and to bring together the various activities that we see in an organization, starting with organizational development, moving on to organizational learning, still in the stage of the learning organization. It is the beginning of the 21st century, still as fresh and crisp as it has been when it came to the discourse in the 80s and 90s. Mm-hmm. And that is something we should engage in. And this is something that taps into everybody's experience in an organization. Everybody has an idea how things can be improved or how things can be made differently. And
do you mean everyone in the system, in the organizational system? So regardless of your role?
Everyone from the CEO down to the shop floor, everybody has an idea what can be improved, and you can tap into that, and you can see does that on the larger scale promote a better practice. And we've seen that in organizational development in the last 20 years. These approaches and of participation, of bringing people together, to debating their ideas of improvement, really made a difference and really enabled organizations to come up with a more desirable practice that tapped into the experience and the knowledge of every single worker and manager, and by doing so, creating a more desirable practice, a more successful practice, a more fruitful practice, you name it. Mm-hmm. To acknowledge that moving into the organizational setup, looking at business processes, looking at structures, looking at individual career paths, is all regulation that supports a desirable future practice, and by doing so, making it easier to change. In contrast to, we always refer to the example of promoting teamwork in an environment which rewards individual performance.
Yeah,
you see that the regulation that awards individual performance works against the idea of teamwork, and to not getting trapped into that. And that is certainly one of the major tasks and that we need to have a critical eye on when we look at organizational development and the futures of organization. If we engage, as we do at the moment, in all kinds of ideas of participation and holacracy and lean hierarchy, we need to acknowledge that the organization is the most powerful tool that we have on the way to change.
Right. So does that mean that when you say the most powerful tool we have, because just now you were talking about the organizational context, and before we were also talking about civilization and the bigger plane of society. So do you feel that organizational change and um, um, governance, as you just explained it in an organizational setting, is like a learning ground or a space for potential for what we're trying to do in the bigger plane of society?
Certainly, certainly. Only that in an organization, another logic applies. You can lay off people. You can't do that as a state. And with that comes this sort of distorted idea that a business person could be a good, well, public leader. It's a different logic that applies. In the public realm, you cannot lay off people. You have to live with the people who are there.
Yeah.
You cannot sack citizens, and any kind of performance measure, be it business success or taxes paid, or so, does not apply for further action. You can do that in the private realm where all the organizations dwell. You can decide who's in and who's out. That you cannot do with your own citizens. They're all in, cannot lay them off. So a different logic applies, which goes beyond the ideas of competition, which goes beyond the ideas of performance.
Yeah.
And we see that in what we've learned about meritocracies in the last 20, 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
If we focus on performance, we can acknowledge that some people are smarter, work harder, get further in life, all well, but what do we do with those who are not that smart, who do not work that hard, who have difficulties for whatever reason, and
Yeah.
find themselves at the very bottom of that hierarchy and pyramid of meritocracy?
Mm-hmm.
We cannot lay them off. They are not trash. They are not people to sack. So what do we need there to govern that kind of game? It's a different game that needs aspects of solidarity, that needs ideas of commons, that needs ideas of how to regulate the benefit out of performance. It makes sense that somebody who works harder should have more, but how much more? Is it necessary that we end up in a situation on the planet that we're in at the moment where a handful of people hold as much wealth than the entire bottom half of the planet's population? So find a balance, and that again refers back to do we really want to play Monopoly, and do we really have the chance to have players dropping out of the game, and where would they drop to? Where would they end up? And well, that is the public realm, which makes it more challenging than the games that we play in the private world, where these games are exclusive, and we play them in a regulated framework of the rule of law, property rights, patents, and all of that. We tap into an infrastructure which allows us to play these games, and that's wonderful. And we can compete against each other on a mild level to increase customer focus, to come up with better products, to be conscious with resource consumption, to be efficient and all of that. In a moderate way, yes, that's what we wanted to see in the business world, but only there. That does not apply at all to the public realm.
Yeah, so thank you for pointing out the difference in terms of the different systems or contexts. And so, so there are some lessons to be learned about governance and playing games and seeing how we can involve everyone in coming up with ideas or with possibilities for an organization to grow and evolve and to also, in that sense, become more civilized or civilize itself. But there's also limitations to how we find examples in organizations that we can, in your opinion, cannot use in society. And the examples you mentioned about not being able to fire certain people who do not live up to a particular standard that we set for ourselves in society, and that we cannot drop them. Actually, when we look in practice, there's large groups in society that are being dropped. And so this brings me to the realm of what good governance then really is, and how do you deal with that from an ethical perspective? Because when I hear you speak, there's so many parallels with some other debates about whether it's ethical or not to fire people from an organization, as the impact again of individuals is not as big as that of the system. So blaming individuals and then firing them, what does that good does that do for the entire system? So I guess I'm saying, how do you look at good governance and what's the role of ethics in there, in games that are finite or not, maybe not so finite?
Mm-hmm. We look at good governance from a systems perspective. It has two sides. One side is what we have been talking about for the first half of our interview, which is to look into context design, to design rules, regulations, processes, and structures. It's a little bit like where I come from wine farming. You cannot predict the growth of a single vine, but you can put up a pole stick a pole in the earth and give the vine something to hold on. You can do that with an entire field. You can provide a frame for the vines to find their directions and to prosper and to be fruitful.
Yeah.
They wouldn't survive. I come from Germany. They wouldn't survive if we wouldn't care, if we wouldn't provide this frame. But providing that frame, they prosper. They are fruitful. That is what we can do in terms of context design, putting it in a framework, putting it in a corridor of desirable activity in an organization, for example. That's the one side. And the other side is having the capacity to look into the single cases. If something is broken, if something runs out of the corridor, then you have to go there. It's like in the vine. There may be a single vine not flourishing, so you have to take it out and replant it. You have to take care, as the wine farmers say, you have to revisit every single vine 17 times a year. You do that. Just go along, say hello. Are you okay? And the vine will nod and say, yes, I'm okay. Or say, oh, I could do with a bit of grooming, and then you do that. And to find the balance. when we look at business processes, we may go as far as acknowledging that 80% of the things that happen in an organization can be caught with 20% of standardization and putting things into business processes, giving structures to them. And then the remaining 20% of activities in an organization are such that it is more beneficial or efficient to have managers taking care of that, to have real people taking care of that, and not an ERP system or business process. This is where we find a sweet balance in between structures, standardization on the one side, and people getting involved with all their empathy, with all their creativity where it is needed. You don't want to waste managerial capability and leadership capacities and capabilities to reinvent the wheel over and over again, or to reinvent business processes over and over again. You can do that once, then you can improve on them, and then you can have ordinary people dealing with extraordinary tasks. And we know that we know that from sports. If you take care of a team not on the basis of promoting stars, but caring for the team, you can lead a team of B players to an A performance. While on the contrary, if you only have these stars, what do you do if the stars get injured, if they drop out, if the next club comes and offers more? Well, then they're gone. So what you want in an organization is to use the power of the organization to enable people to live up to a performance which is beyond their individual capabilities, but very well a possibility if they play together in a organizationally orchestrated manner.
Yeah. So if I capture this, what you're saying is, and thank you so much for your explanation, when you explore good governance, this means to you that it's about alternating having these structures in place that support whatever it is that you are co-creating from an organizational context, and taking care of everything and everyone that's making its contribution. I just from the example that you gave, I just have this image in my head now of someone who's walking around their vineyard and doing their 17 walks to visit all of them throughout the year. And so and what comes to mind is also the word care. Like, okay, I have these structures that, to pin it back to one of the earlier things that we discussed, to create a context wherein things are possible. And then there is a care to see if everyone who's in it, when I'm doing my 17 times round, if they are still able to contribute to the games that we decided to play in that context. And so for me, this implies that you need to have some sort of ethical radar in terms of what you're asking all the each and every person who is within the organizational context, what's in their power to contribute, what's in their potential to contribute, and that the ethical is about do we have the correct boundaries for people to actually work within or not, and does that serve the whole or not? Does that resonate with you about the ethical part? Because I'm still looking for that.
Absolutely. And if we talk about ethics and if we talk about morals, we need to acknowledge that again has a practical side. and that we can do a lot on the side of practices to improve the inbuilt ethics of an organization or the inbuilt ethics of leadership and management. And that leads me.
So what fuels that then? Because the way you're phrasing it now is like there's some innate sense of ethics that we can tap, but then and now I'm thinking of, for example, leaders who are in the paradigm where we're very much focused on making profit and shareholder value and everything else. What would prompt them to tap more into those inner ethics, and why is that so beneficial for people to do?
And that in that case, I would offer a very critical perspective. If we end up with this question, we haven't done our homework in the first place. If it's like micromanagement or like the A player, if the single leader or single manager is concerned with ethical questions of larger dimension, we haven't done our homework as an organization, and we haven't done our homework as setting up a leadership system or management system that lives up to its basic functions. And if we look at that, we need to acknowledge that we have three realms in three areas which have to come together: management, leadership, and entrepreneurship. We have the management looking at the here and now, the day-to-day management, the operations. We need to have a watchful eye on that. We need to look into the then and there, the future, the scenarios, the strategies. This is entrepreneurship. This is where we take risks. And we need to look into leadership, giving orientation, coming up with a narrative that describes the purpose of an organization. And if you have these three together, then you cover what is needed in terms of, for the lack of a better word, I call it captainship, to really steer an organization safely through the present and into the future. You need to have your eye on the present. And that is something that got overemphasized in the later years by the financial markets. And this is where Lawrence Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, sent his letter to all the other CEOs to demand purpose. Why did he do that? Is that for an ethical reason? Probably yes. But as we know from management cybernetics and models like the Bible system model, we have to balance the here and now and the then and there. But we've seen in the last 10, 15, 20 years, maybe, the shifting towards the focus on management, the here and now, the short-term revenues, the short-term performance and profit on the expense of the future. And as we know from the Bible system model, we have the entrepreneurial part, the strategic part, we have the operational part, the management part, and we need to balance that. And how do we do that? How do we balance future against present? Because we can tap into a purpose. We can have an idea of a normative kind of management, which we call leadership, to give an orientation, to help with the balance, to help with the decision. Do these resources go into profit, short-term profit, or do we use these resources to invest in our future? And if you have a purpose, if you have leadership in an organization, and this is where I focus when I use the word leadership. If we have this kind of facilitation or facilitating that balance in place, we have a lot of ethical questions done with already, because we are not running into into situations where we are lost, because we have a purpose, we have leadership, and this helps an organization to be viable over time.
Yeah, yeah. And so thank you for this, because you're bringing in the concept and practice of purpose, and I really like the link with ethics and good governance. So if I understand you correctly, you say that this innate sense of ethics and good governance comes from a good balance between management and entrepreneurship, and that leadership stands close to actually enacting or envisioning or enabling, facilitating the purpose to be lived. And so this means then that a leadership is also there to make sure that an organization is focused on its purpose, and not necessarily focused on either long-term or short-term, but that there's a constant sort of balancing or scanning what is needed now, and from that place of purpose to then make decisions what's best for the organization and those who work in it. And so we're talking about governance, we're talking about organizations, and we just brought in purpose. And within this context, I would like to hear from you. How do you then view change? How do you look at change in organizations? And I know that you have extensive experience in both the private and the public domain when it comes to this. So when we continue on where we just ended with the conclusion about purpose and how important that is, where does change fit in all this mix? Is that something that the leadership does because it's looking into purpose and what would be a good next development or step for this organization with regards to this purpose, or is change something else? So could you speak to organizational change in this context?
Looking from a management cybernetics point of view, change is the essence of life. And this is to look at two components that come with change and need to be balanced. One is continuous improvement.
Mm-hmm.
It has, if we tap, like my dear friend Thomas Wong, who I once wrote a paper together on the topic from Hong Kong. He's a practitioner of traditional Chinese medicine, and he immediately said, improvement, continuous improvement, has the quality of yin. It is sort of going on and improving what's there, not more, not less. While innovation has the fiery quality of yang and brings new things into the world. Mm-hmm. And we need both. If we only do continuous improvement, organizations get stiff after a while. That is what Jack Welch at General Electric realized in the 90s after going through lean management and Six Sigma and these continuous improvement programs. And at a certain point, the gain out of the change will be marginal. And then you need to innovate. And that is when Jeff Immelt came in and said, oh, we go innovation. And they moved on, and they did a lot of new things and made progress in that field until they lost their organizational knowledge. Because you need two sides. You need the balance of the two, of continuously improving, harvesting the knowledge curve, and on the other side, starting new things over and over again. And that is something we do rarely relate to, is we need not only the balance between continuous improvement and innovation, we also need to have that on a sufficient level. It's like your own body. Every body cell is replaced every 7 years on average. So everything or in your body, things die and grow at the same time, although you pretty much remain the same. But it needs to be on a certain level. If the recreational rate of that change is not sufficient, we wither, we age, and eventually we die. So that needs to be on a sufficient level. And that's the same for organizations. If we do not see enough change in an organization, there's no life in the organization. It's not thriving. It's not progressing. It does not live into a future, because it will eventually die. And this is we're back to the balance of management and entrepreneurship. This is where we need to see more entrepreneurship or intrapreneurship in organizations to recreate to the organization over and over again, to allow it to live into a future, in contrast to just having small change programs every now and then because we want to fix something. No, change is not about fixing broken things. That is healing. But change is to continuously improve and innovate.
Yeah, that's interesting because as you're talking about this, one of the recent dialogues that I find myself in when we're talking about the systemic and organizations is that part of the entrepreneurship is also the notion that on one hand there is this task or this process of continuous change, and that there is a way for an organization to continuously adapt to its environment so that it can function and thrive. On the other hand, in one of my discussions, what surfaced is that good entrepreneurship is also about knowing when things are ending. And when your organization is no longer able to renew itself. I'd like to know what your view is on that on that vision.
I wouldn't put it on the side of leadership, on the side of entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship is the forward driving force, taking risks and going with that. It's more on the leadership side to provide orientation, to say, oh, on the life curve or in the life cycle of an organization, we're coming towards the end. And then we can turn to the entrepreneurs and say, what can we do to prevent that? What can we bring in anew to rejuvenate the entire organization and to come up with a new business model also, or whatsoever? Yes, we can do that, and organizations can do that, and they can live for hundreds of years. But we need the balance of management and entrepreneurship through the leadership. And the leadership should be in touch with where are we in the life cycle and what can we do and where should we put our emphasis to go on with this organization. And this is where the entrepreneurs come back into the picture and say, yes, more resources towards the future will allow us to carry on, or, and that is rarely heard of, acknowledging that for an organization, time had come, and it's time to die and to let go, to dismantle the entire thing peacefully before it crashes. I haven't heard of too many examples of that.
But this is, for you, this is also part of leadership.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so to get back to that, we talked about governance, purpose, change, and if I understand you correctly, then the closest of the three that you mentioned in terms of management, entrepreneurship, and leadership comes closest to shaping all that, to shaping those conditions for the context within which the organization can function, can grow, can operate, and where the individuals in it have an orientation through the purpose in terms of how am I contributing, and also that leadership is about knowing when things are ending for the organization.
The stewards of the purpose.
Yeah. The stewards of the purpose. And so we've almost come to the end of our conversation. And I wanted to ask you, with all the things that we've discussed today, we've only opened such a small part of what consists of your entire experience in this field. And what I'd like to know is, with the things that we shared today, how did these all influence your leadership in your organization?
I've been running a change management consultancy for the last 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
We're dismantling it as we speak.
So you're ending it now.
We're ending it now. We were always on the forefront saying we need to drink our own champagne, and what we were following all the trends of participation and transparency and moving into becoming a cooperative and experimenting with all that. And we experienced a lot before we went out to consult and support managers and leaders and entrepreneurs. And by now, what is it? They all have families. They all wanted to settle down. They wanted a different practice for their own life, a better balance in their life, where they would not have to travel so much and so on. And the question was, would we engage in a new generation, bringing them on board, or just call it an experience which had its time? And we've grown with it, and all our consultants and partners are now in leading positions with the strategy departments of major companies, or with the HR, or with the organizational development, and they found their place.
Mm-hmm.
After all, and they enjoyed the time where the learning was so intensive and the traveling so all over the place. Yes, there are times for that, and there are times to settle and have a family and have a bit more of a life. And we decided to close the doors and say we all want to move on, and the energy is now beyond that very organization. It served us for some time quite well, but now we all wanted to move on. And as you told the audience in the beginning of the interview, I'm now Dean at the European School of Governance. I moved into academia, I moved into the think tank world, I moved into looking at the serious games of societies, providing the framework for all these organizations. And following the German philosopher Theodor W. Adorno, who said, there's no right life in the wrong life, which is to say, there are no happy organizations in a distorted societal frame. So what can we do to improve the frameworks in which organizations operate, reinstall the primacy of politics in a good way, and having politics caring for every citizen, not only those in the business world, but for those in the business world as well, and see how we meet the challenges of the 21st century and the challenges of the Anthropocene, and how do we orchestrate all the energies that we bring as people, human beings, and make the most out of it in terms of becoming stewards of the earth, stewards of the living world.
No, we've been talking about as I'm now learning with this last sharing that you just did, that we're actually learning about stewardship and how you see that, and that all the other concepts and examples that we discussed today are sort of under that umbrella of stewardship. So I truly enjoyed our conversation, and I'd like to say thank you so much for being here in the Systemic Leadership Summit.
Thank you, Jennifer, to providing the opportunity and having me.
You're welcome. And to everyone who's been watching, I truly hope that you enjoyed this session. And if you want to take the conversation further about stewardship, about leadership, about good governance, ethics, or purpose, or anything else related to this session or other sessions in our summit, then please meet us in the community space for the Systemic Leadership Summit. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Take care. Bye-bye.